Walt, last week we previewed Tesla's upcoming launch in Austin. I gotta say, you called it right because days later, Bloomberg confirmed what you were talking about. It was not June 1st, it's going to be June 12th. But here at Autonomy Markets, we're always focused on the future. What do you think's coming next with Tesla with the launch pending?
The remarkable thing, in my view, was just the reaction in Uber stock. I mean, I talked about this a little bit last week and in prior weeks, the kind of the pessimism within the institutional investor base on the June delivery dates and how it wasn't really reflected in the stock. I mean, look at how much Uber stock has rallied, and part of it's perhaps even misperceptions about Waymo, which we'll get into later. So now the question is, has it completely flipped? I don't think it really has. I think there's still skepticism in terms of where people think Tesla goes from here in the market.
One thing that's clear, Walt, this is a headline-driven market with very little substance outside of autonomy markets for really what's going on in autonomy.
And I think we have to dissect what you and I see on YouTube and in Twitter versus where the institutional dollars are truly invested. You know, on names like Uber, which are not necessarily as dominated by individual investors' investments like they are in Tesla. So you see like these countdown clocks to January 1st, which continue. And I think that puts kind of a false perception that like all hell is going to get unleashed on June 1st and all hell is going to get unleashed in the market on June 1st. That's not the case. And that's kind of extremism in some ways, the other ways. And it's not going to go, Tesla is not going to offer immediate nationwide, everyone with a hardware 4 Model Y is all of a sudden going to have autonomous available to them. So, but that's fine. That I don't think is really, the types of perceptions that are in some of these related stocks like Uber, like Lyft, among others.
Tesla's been very clear. Mr. Musk has even posted on X, it will be 10 Model Ys on day one. Not millions of Model Ys, 10, and put it in a very controlled, safe manner. But yeah, you're right. The countdown clocks spark hysteria on one side of the market. And then on the institutional side, anytime you get a Tesla headline, Uber seemingly sells off. But then Lyft, it just seems like it's floating out there without a captain.
Let's first talk about, provide more details. And perhaps some of this is reiteration of what to expect in June. And then let's talk about the catalyst for the future. First, in June, 10 limited ODD, right? So what is next in terms of the catalyst? You're going to have one of two things. You're going to have a hater saying like, oh, this is only driving on these 2 or 3 streets. Does that have a positive impact on Uber stock and a negative on Tesla? Maybe. But I think the bigger potential impact is, one of these selected riders posting a picture of the driver out, or if we or others have the opportunity to travel to Austin and post similar pictures. And I think that on balance, that's going to have a much larger impact on the near term. Let's also be clear, there was some lot of noise on Twitter again talking about the 1-to-1 safety driver. For our listeners, you knew that last week. We specifically called that out last week. And I related it to where Waymo is today, and maybe some misperceptions about how the Waymo safety driver operates today. So, Grayson, I think it's important to discuss or continue to add color, and maybe for us to continue to reiterate what to expect in the coming weeks. Is there other questions that you think or misperceptions that are out there for June, and before we get into maybe what happens July, August, and September?
The market is full of misinformation and factually incorrect information. There's certain outlets, and I'm going to call one of them out by name here, Fortune. They've been posting inaccurate stories about Tesla. One of the stories said that Tesla has had no communications with the city of Austin. I read the article. I call Tesla. They tell me that's not true. They've been in complete, open, transparent conversations with the city of Austin. Go back to Fortune. That's what we heard. That's what we reported. No, it's wrong. There's all this misconception. And to the individuals that are concerned, there might not be a lot of communication. There is communication with the city of Austin. Let's say that for the record. There's communication with the state of Texas. Let's say that for the record. And furthermore, for the Monday morning quarterbacks, if you understand regulatory and you understand policy, the way autonomous vehicles in the state of Texas is regulated, it's regulated at the state level, not at the city level. There's a little thing called preemption, but Tesla's doing the right thing by having the communication. So I want to state that there for the record.
So let's go back then to what we think is next, because that's ultimately what's most important. And then how we think it potentially affects the market perception. So you have it launch on day one and everyone's like, what next? Like, so, for example, if someone on Twitter, I forget the guy's name, he's an investor saying like, oh, how is this going to impact Uber if they only have 20 cars? Of course, like, it's not that Tesla is just going to remain with 10 or 20 cars in Austin. So then the question is, when does that expand? When do you get to the next point? And for me, it's a gray area where I think that I'll say by the end of the year that you will see a footprint in Austin which approximate, if not exceeds, where Waymo is in the market today. It would be much more helpful to our listeners if we could be more precise about that, Grayson. And I think the challenge here is that Tesla, as I've talked about before, has a more of a safety culture than I think people give it credit for. So keeping that in mind, how quickly do they expand the initial service area, or as you like to say, and the industry likes to say, the ODD? Did I get the letters right?
You did get the letters right. You did. You did very well. The ODD expansion will come on technical performance, and it will come on consumer demand. I will be very conservative and say month over month, perhaps every 2 to 3 weeks, you'll see a gradual expansion of the ODD until they reach a very similar ODD as it relates to Waymo's. That ODD could expand further than Waymo's because Giga is right down the road. And Mr. Musk on X this week, he talked about self-delivery of the Model Ys. How great would that be? They come off the factory line and go right into service. Now, all of a sudden, you can, for all practical purposes, expand an infinite ODD. That's a huge advantage, which raises the question. I know this is a big hypothetical. The number one thing that a politician wants in their state or their county, jobs. What type of jobs? They want manufacturing jobs. When Tesla successfully scales this Model Y self-delivery, could we see micro factories, perhaps a smaller form factor, pop up in counties, and that just starts feeding it as an assembly line, and then the fleets start expanding dramatically quicker?
That's not a part of my expertise. I have no idea. It doesn't seem like that's possible, that you would just have micro manufacturing facilities. It seems to go against the whole concept of how you generate scale for cars. So I doubt that's happening. I'm less, it's great that they're going to have self-delivery. Great. But that's not what excites me about the market. What excites me about the market is them expanding their footprint in Austin and then going to additional markets. I mean, one other part of this is I think there's some expectations that obviously Teslas can operate on highways on day one. Do you think this very initial ODD will include a highway? Even if it's going from one exit to another, just for them to say like, hey, we're doing highways in Austin before Tesla's doing highways in California. Any chance of that? And if not, again, getting back to the earlier question, how soon before the ODD gets large enough within Austin where it would include highways? And that becomes, again, a bragging point relative to where Waymo is in the market.
The way Austin's designed from a municipal planning standpoint, you do not need highways. You can go from the airport to Giga to downtown to Terry Black's, all without having to go on a highway. So it'll be a while. Once Tesla expands to the suburbs, yes. The indicator that I'll look for when they start testing driver out Model Ys and SH-130, State Highway 130, which butts up to Giga. When we start seeing that, then they're getting close. But on day one, no.
So then I guess the question is beyond I'm trying to think of all of the data points, all of the catalysts that will impact my world on the investment side, beyond just expanding Austin, which again, I think will be at Waymo or greater by the end of the year, or at least that's the goal of the company, assuming that safety enables them to do that. When do they launch in California or additional markets that would include highways?
California, I do not see coming in 2025. Based on the regulatory environment, if you want a highway environment, Dallas. It's a highway environment. Austin to Dallas, not very far. I could see another Texas city coming online, and I'll say online that they say 10 to 20 vehicles by the end of the year. And I could see highways being enabled in Dallas, since that is a freeway city.
So they've already talked about California cities being their next markets. So we're going to put that aside because of the regulatory hurdles there. Some of them perhaps politically motivated, given who the owner is of the company. So I guess the question is, can they pivot that quickly enough to be able to get into another market? And is it more likely that all we really see in terms of 2025 progress for Tesla is just the expansion of Austin? And frankly, that's probably enough, assuming, again, they can hit this broader market, drive out hundreds of cars, if not up to 1,000 cars. That might be enough to kind of continue the concern that people have with Tesla. But assuming the regulatory issue in California and just timeline issues, are you effectively, Grayson, implying that you don't think there will be additional markets launched for Tesla in 2025, or you do think they can do 20 cars in Dallas?
I do think they could do 20 cars. As an investor standpoint, if Tesla has 100 plus vehicles running in Austin and an ODD similar to Waymo, full driver out, that's a success. And to me, that indicates to the market that Tesla clearly can scale this technology.
One other question for you. How do you think they're going to find these people that are initially approved when they first launch their very limited ODD in Austin?
You're going to get a phone call. It's going to play a song. It says, "Why can't we be friends? Why can't we be friends?" And then you'll know you got invited. So perhaps that's how they're going to do it.
I mean, what's interesting is if the ODD is relatively small, it's going to have to be someone that only cares about that limited area. So I guess technically you could probably go door to door, like old school. I don't know. It might not be safe to go door to door in Texas. You don't want to knock on someone's door to find out who the riders are going to be. So look, I can establish residency in Austin for a couple of weeks. Maybe I can get on that list, but rest assured to our listeners, Autonomy Markets will be doing our best to get in one of those cars in the month of June. Let's move on to Waymo. Waymo was a little quiet this week. I think they talked about road trip cities. These seem like the easy announcements. You send a couple of cars to a new city, like, hey, road trip city. What can Waymo announce to deflect? And I say that because I'm sure there's going to be like people like, oh, they're the leader. What do they have to announce? Like, let's remind everyone, they announced something with Toyota, which no one really knows what it is, like that they're actually talking. So I think that actions speak louder than people's beliefs, I guess. And I think Waymo does, is reactive, and I think there is certainly pressure on them. What could they announce as in the month of June to deflect with the news flow that I think is going to be coming out of Tesla?
Waymo is feeling pressure. Point blank, Waymo is feeling pressure. The one thing that Waymo could announce, in my opinion, a production schedule with Toyota, not an MOU, not a hi, we're having a conversation, a full-blown production schedule. Announce where the plant's going to be. Are you going to build it in southeastern Ohio where you're building the main mobility Sienna vans? Are you going to use the Toyota brand? Are you going to use the Lexus brand? Give details, give a production schedule, announce the factory. Hyundai did that when they made the announcement with Waymo. We know they're going to be made in Savannah, Georgia. So it's a win for the Trump administration. Announce perhaps you're going to make them in Southeast Ohio. A win for the Trump administration. Waymo has to put a political win on the board because the Zeeker's an albatross hanging around their neck.
There's a lot to unpack there. First on Hyundai, I think they just announced that they could implement price increases because of the tariff. I don't think the president likes to see when companies talk about price increases relative to his policies. So I don't know if Waymo is going to be far enough along with another OEM to have some type of production schedule. But with Hyundai, they could be more visible in talking about that relationship. Or maybe, if they had initial dialogue with Toyota that they talked about a couple of weeks ago, maybe there's another press release. Hey, we're at letter of intent or some type of, one initial thing that gets announced. So I'm going to predict that. I'm going to predict that in the month of June, Waymo will formalize something with Toyota. I'm hoping that it's productions for the Waymo One fleet. It could also be, something more tangible in the co-development of, a privately owned Waymo Toyota.
Letter of intent, I could put it in my pipe and smoke it. It's not going to move it. We really need real clarity on what they're doing. And we also need to know, is this going to be for the US market or the Japanese market? Because photos are popping up on X and photos are popping up on Reddit that the testing that Waymo's doing in Japan is dramatically increasing.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, so if you go and talk about stuff outside of the country, and then again, let's revert this back to one of your favorite, unforced errors, Zeekr. Things are certainly heating up on the China front in the United States. I think there were some comments yesterday that were kind of very vocal. I think the market's off today again on tariff concerns. Does Zeekr get pulled into the mix? And there's, because sometimes the administration can be pretty surgical in announcements about individual, universities, countries, whatever it is. So could Waymo being on the receiving end of that, being like, hey, there ain't no Zeekr should be coming into this country, especially ones that are autonomous. Even though we both know that Zeekr is just the vehicle and the technology is Waymo, it doesn't change the ability for the administration to spin that as this Chinese vehicle that doesn't have a driver in it. Do you want that on the streets? And that's a political win as well as a trade war type win.
There's still Chinese components in it. If I can sit here and make a very brilliant political argument with you comparing it to Huawei. I know it's networking infrastructure.
Huawei.
Fine. Huawei. I can sit here and make an argument for you, networking infrastructure versus vehicle, but still, it goes against everything that America's trying to do with autonomy. You read public statements by Secretary Duffy. You see public statements by him. You see speeches by him where they want America to maintain global leadership in autonomous vehicles. And what Waymo did with the Zeekr, they sold us out. Point blank.
But this has been the case for 6 months or longer. As long as we've been doing this cast. Not that you're wrong, but it hasn't manifested itself. And in fact, at Google I/O, they were handing out pins that include Zeekr-shaped light blue pins. So it hasn't really happened yet. So the question is, does it happen in June or July? Maybe what are the odds you put on that the chickens come home to roost for Zeekr within the next 90 days? Odds on that.
90 days, no. End of the year, yes, because we are having movement in DC on an autonomous vehicle bill. That's the game changer there.
Before we get to the national framework bill, because I think that's obviously very important, just one other thing, because again, I think what made last week's podcast so great was talking about the market implications and then seeing Uber's reaction after Tesla. So now let's look at Waymo and Uber. And my view is, from an institutional investor standpoint, there's now like this belief that Waymo and Uber are somehow like locked and in bed. And that, going forward, that the concept of a Waymo One only network, like Tesla has claimed that they want to be, is a lower probability. Not like 10%, but I would say that the market's probably like believing there's a 35% chance that it's Waymo One only as things progress, regardless of what Tesla does. And look, maybe as Tesla succeeds, it scares Waymo and they run into Uber's hands and they're the partners that together are going to fight against Tesla. Where are you on the view of Waymo One versus Waymo partnered with Uber going forward?
I don't buy the Uber demand narrative that Dara is spinning in the market. Waymo One, in my opinion, and we have data, can generate enough demand without Uber. They don't need Uber. I was thinking about, do I take a flight up to Atlanta just to see? And it's like, well, what if I don't get the Waymo? That was a complete waste of time. Hesitancy. So I canceled my trip. I didn't book it because the hesitancy there. I want a consistent Waymo experience every time. I don't want the Forrest Gump line, life's like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get, because you get bombed out, smoked out vehicles and you get a clean Waymo. I want the consistent experience every time. And I know we harp on this. I know the team at Uber listens. I know we've gotten feedback on this. There's no consistent experience with X. There's no autonomous vehicle tier. There's no Waymo tier. Point blank, I'll say this for the record, Waymo does not need Uber.
I mean, that may be true. I think the answer is a little bit more nuanced, and from my standpoint, I'll give you an example. I finally I used to be like a loyal Uber customer, and Brandon, my partner at Lightshed, was always hassling me about the cost relative to Lyft. So the other day, I saw it was a ride, from the city back up into the suburbs. I checked Uber, it was like $200 something. I'm like, that's kind of wild. Let's check Lyft. Dramatically lower. And Lyft is consistently lower. And Uber's ability to charge those higher prices are in part based on, laziness, inertia, as Brandon would say, in the fact that I just open up that Uber app. I think now I'm going to flip to your side. That changes when there's a change in the product. Right now, it's like, okay, I'm in there anyway. It's the same driver. How much hassle do I want to go over? I'm not sure why Lyft isn't creating more share for being cheaper, but whatever. If we're now switching to autonomy, it opens up the opportunity for someone to shift their usage. I'll also say, going back to podcasts that I listened to this week, again, misinformation. I don't want to say it's misinformation, but I think, let's say I have a differing viewpoint on where the market is, even though there's certain people that should know this market better than anybody. When you say Uber delivers 3 to 5 minute wait times, where is that exactly? I mean, I'm going to start literally tweeting, I hit send, and it claims that the car is going to be there in 3 minutes, and then I'll time when it actually gets there. And I just don't believe that if someone can achieve 9-minute wait time for an autonomous vehicle in the near term, that's like some dramatic difference in terms of the product that you're going to use. Because if I'm in a rush, sure, Uber's promising me 3 minutes. Does it actually get there in 3 minutes? Does your Ubers in Florida get there in 3 minutes when they say it's going to get there in 3 minutes? Ever? Like, ever?
No, and I want no. Zero, zilch, nada. And I want to highlight this. Horrible. My average wait time, ready for this? 15 minutes. I have to plan in advance.
Hold on. As stated by the app or on your actual, I want to compare what the app tells you versus what actually happens.
App says 15. It's normally 20 to 22. It's horrible.
Look, that's fine if the app says 15. I'm saying that, like, if the app's saying 5 and it's going to get there in 50. Now, look, I get it. It's traffic. Like, if I'm at the airport, like, stuff happens. Like, my point is not to denigrate that they can't get there to me in 5 minutes. My point is that the consumer doesn't believe the 3 to 5 minutes. So if you say 9 minutes and you're waiting for what you expect to be a cleaner, more reliable, more consistent experience of that car, that I don't think is going to be a deal stopper, as has been suggested by those that are really pushing the rideshare industry as this indefensible demand mechanism. So, look, I 100% recognize the demand that they deliver. That's just more relevant, I believe, to a fragmented market that might include a Neuro-powered car, a Wave-powered car. I don't believe that's the case for Waymo. With that said, what's my view on this? I don't think Waymo has made their mind up, and that's the bottom line. So those that are insisting that Waymo is going to be with Uber, I think are full of shit. And those that are insisting that Waymo is going to do it alone are also full of shit. So let's go back to then, what do we think what is the voiced initial intentions of the company? And there was literally a podcast, another one, Grayson. I was fucking listening to podcasts all over the place. This was, someone was interviewing Chris Urmson, who is the CEO of Aurora, and as many people know, was an early executive at Waymo who left, I believe, in 2016, and was asked about that. And Urmson, who, by the way, for those that don't know, Aurora, their largest shareholder is Uber. Okay, they received assets from Uber. Dara, we used to be on the board. Whatever, they have a tight relationship. Urmson in this interview was like, "Oh yeah, I remember when I was, with Dimitri, who's now the co-CEO of the company, in the early days." And we were talking about, isn't it going to be great that we'll never have to take an Uber again? And then literally detailed the stuff that we've talked about on this podcast about cleanliness, reliability, all of those factors of why you would prefer an autonomous vehicle. He didn't say we dreamed about how our Waymos, or whatever they called the company at the time, would plug into the Uber network. He said, I think I wrote this down somewhere, but basically, wouldn't it be great if I never had to take an Uber again? So that's the initial intention of a company. And what's wild is, him actually saying this, in an interview about what was his largest shareholder. Now, granted, he was referring back to what happened in 2016, but those are the signs that I think we look for. Sorry to go on a diatribe. I know it's better to have interaction on our podcast, but let me just relate this now to today, because the inbounds are going to be like, well, things have changed, this, that, and the other thing. 100% agree. And here's what I would say on a pushback on that. When this thing goes public, when Waymo goes public, is Dimitri and Takendra going to be the CEOs of this company? Are they the ones that can show investors a path to profitability, or are they just managing a great science project to get the technology to work? And then will those new executives that take it public, and even if it's them, what's the decision that they're going to make in terms of communicating to the market a profitable strategy? Is it with Uber? Is it without? Is it, putting electronics on a Jaguar, or is it more of an OEM strategy? Sorry for the long diatribe, but what are your views on how that plays out?
It's without Uber for a very simple reason. If Alphabet does spin out, Waymo does go public, and you're overly reliant on Uber, that's an Achilles heel. So why am I going to invest in you when I could invest in Uber and have less risk? So it has to be a pure play.
The argument would be on the opposite of that, Grayson. It's a risk deflector. I don't have to worry about going out there and getting it. Exactly. Grayson, I don't know if people saw this, was waving his hand. But I agree with you, because at that point, 2 years from now, you've established, Waymo will have expanded. They will finally have gotten Hyundai ramped up, and you've established that you can create your own demand. The only issue is going to be can they have enough supply? But even the supply, they would argue is something that can be fulfilled with private ownership. And I think all of these deals are not long-term deals. We don't know. I don't know this for a fact, but from what I've read and the body language that I've seen, I don't think any of these market by market Waymo Uber deals are more than a year or two. Could be wrong.
We've had clues that have been dropped. We've had hints that have been dropped that we do believe that they're short-term. We do have no factual, nothing to point the audience to. But the thing that nobody's talking about that we're going to start talking about now, what is the, you asked, what's the next shoe to drop? You want to know what it is? Tesla starts bundling unlimited complimentary Robotaxi access with your purchase or your lease of a Tesla. That's a demand trigger that, wow, if I'm Waymo, and then Uber, the whole demand narrative goes away because the Model Y is the best-selling vehicle in the world.
I mean, I think what the result of that is going to be, panic is an aggressive word. I use it sometimes just to kind of evoke extreme. It's not actual panic, but it's going to accelerate the viewpoints of the OEMs and Waymo to partner together. Whether it's getting deals ready for long-term private ownership, but also just sourcing Waymo with more and more cars. And I think that is the initial response that you're going to get. Waymo can do that on their own based on their balance sheet. Other technology companies are going to need the Uber relationship for sure.
Other technology companies, yes, 100% need that. Waymo doesn't, because we talked about last week, Waymo could put the personal vehicles on the Waymo One network. And that's why Uber, you're starting to see them get very vocal about the fragmentation strategy. Andrew McDonald, who runs autonomy for Uber, did an interview with the BBC talking about fragmentation, but then the UK government has delayed full driver out deployment times until 2027. So Uber's looking at other markets. They're ready to enter that market now. Uber needs the Neuros, the Waves of the world to survive in autonomy, because without them, I don't really see a credible path forward if Waymo does walk away.
Yeah, I don't disagree. Maybe this is a good time to segue into the Lummis bill.
Senator Lummis, thank you for your belief in autonomy. Thank you for your support of the U.S. economy. The bill, ma'am, that you introduced, the Autonomous Vehicle Acceleration Act of 2025, will streamline regulations. You will give Secretary Duffy, who is doing a phenomenal job as Secretary of Transportation, the tools he needs to ensure that autonomous vehicles and autonomous trucks weighing over 10,001 pounds can scale in America. It's a big day, Walt. The framework is moving forward.
I applaud that and I appreciate that. My pushback, or in my world of telecom, is a lot of times when I see bills that are not bipartisan, I just wonder if they're, kind of a position piece, but not something that necessarily proceeds, through committee. So what are the odds that the committee kind of pushes this to vote?
I see it going through to a vote because we have the Republican majority. Senator Lummis has been out there as an outspoken advocate of Bitcoin and the crypto industry. So she has a lot of goodwill there for embracing new and emerging technologies that will benefit the United States. And I want to highlight specific language that Senator Lummis put in the bill. And quote, maintaining global leadership in autonomous vehicle technology will enhance the competitiveness of the United States, foster economic growth, and spur innovation across the domestic manufacturing sector, end quote. That ties in exactly what I talked about with Tesla and the micro factories. The economic growth is the main reason why I founded the Council for Economic Resilience. And Walt, we had some big news on that this week. The board appointed Jim Mullen, ex-FMCSA administrator and general counsel, as our executive director. So we're moving forward and we're advocating for the autonomy economy. And this bill from Senator Lummis is a home run, really great for the American economy.
I mean, obviously we agree, or I agree, and a national framework is going to be super helpful. And I think it's good for obviously the economy and relative to the issues that we're having with China. I just get concerned that, politics play over logic. And especially if this is in any way associated with Elon. It clearly isn't, right? Because there's so many companies in the U.S. that are going to benefit, and the economy that's going to benefit, including the auto industry, a big employer, right, in terms of a national framework. So, from my standpoint, obvious benefit, but like if Elon's tied to it, do you have Democrats just voting against it based on the kind of anti-Elon rhetoric that exists out there? And similarly, do you anticipate any kind of pushback from labor on this?
There'll always be pushback. There'll always be chatter, but Mr. Musk is not associated with this bill. The American public's associated with this bill. This bill will create jobs at the end of the day, and there will be pushback. And most importantly, what this bill gives, it gives Senator Duffy the ability to put a framework in place that stops job-killing bills such as SB 395 in Nevada, which would effectively ban autonomous trucking by forcing a human behind the wheel. It would eliminate all the shenanigans that are happening on a state-by-state level and allow America to thrive. This is not for Mr. Musk. This is not for GM. This is not for Ford. This is for the American public, and that's why it's important.
Well, we wish them luck, and we'll be watching carefully and reporting back on its progress through committee and hopefully to the other side.
We will. I'll be spending a lot of time in D.C., so look for more news there, because Autonomy Markets, as we always do, we hit the road. And well, I got to tell you, and hitting the road, I hit the road out of California years ago because it's an interesting state, to say the least. There's a lot of chatter that's been brewing in California around the Cal OSHA regulations. Today, you legally cannot operate an autonomous tractor. Let's call it, you have Walt's Farm. Okay, we go see Uncle Walt, we put on our getup and we go see it. You can't deploy an autonomous tractor on your private land. But yet, you can operate a Robotaxi on public roads and charge fares. There's a big disconnect there. It's the Unforced Error of the Week. NBC News Bay Area highlighted it. And the Cal OSHA regulator won't even go on the record with NBC. Unforced Error of the Week. What do you think's going on here, Walt? There's a big disconnect.
Well, I think this is great because when you highlight kind of crazy views like this and existing bans, it just kind of puts in perspective all the other ones as well. So where, like, maybe they had a rational approach to tractors, then, when they're preventing Tesla from launching in California, it might be easier for them to do it. But when everything across the board is just like so anti-technology and ridiculous, I think it ultimately helps, it clear the tracks for all of them. So, including getting perhaps some of the national popular pressure on a national framework, which is what we were just addressing. So, by all means, California, keep being wacky and keep doing these wacky things because, you know, it potentially just gets votes against you on a national level for upcoming laws, like what Senator Lummis is attempting to get done.
It's just one of those things. You never know. They're going to do what they do, but that's why there's a thing called preemption. And that's why the bills that are coming out of Congress are good for the U.S. economy. Well, we went all over the map this week. We did a lot on policy, a lot on the Waymo Uber debate. What do we need to look for in the autonomy markets over the next week?
I mean, there's always investor conferences that exist. So I think at least Lyft is speaking. I know at one. I don't know if Uber is, but they are obviously going to be asked about this June launch. In Lyft's case, I think there's going to be increasing questions about, you know, where they are with Waymo, and you know, whether Waymo goes it alone or goes with Uber. Like, where is Lyft, you know, in that equation? So, you know, these investor conferences are typically just pablum, but, you know, at least there's news for some of these executives to have to react to from the prior week.
T-minus 2 weeks till Tesla officially enters the Robotaxi sector. Every week we will be here. I'll be here in my bright, colorful shirts. Thanks for the feedback. Walt will be here with fancy new haircuts, and we'll be breaking down the autonomy markets for you each and every week. Thanks so much for your feedback. Walt and I really enjoy it. We get a kick out of it. The future is bright. The future is autonomous. The future is a national autonomous vehicle framework. Walt, until next week.